The early morning mist hung low over the Sacramento River as Thomas Williams cast his fishing line into the calm waters. It was 6 a.m. on a Saturday, and the retired construction worker had found his perfect spot along the riverbank just outside San Jose. The silence was broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant chirping of birds awakening to the new day. Thomas had been coming to this secluded bend in the river for over 3 years. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the noise of suburban life and find peace in the rhythm of casting and waiting. His tackle box sat beside him on the grassy bank, along with a thermos of hot coffee and a simple breakfast sandwich his wife had prepared. The morning started like any other. Thomas settled into his favorite folding chair, adjusted his baseball cap against the rising sun, and prepared for what he hoped would be a successful day of fishing. The water was clear, the weather perfect, and he had high hopes for catching some bass or maybe even a small salmon. But as he enjoyed the tranquility, a sound in the distance caught his attention. At first it was barely audible over the gentle flow of the river, a low rumbling call that seemed to carry pain and desperation. Thomas paused, his fishing rod forgotten in his hands, as he strained to identify the source of the sound. The calling grew louder, closer, and more urgent. It was the deep, resonant bellow of a large animal in distress. Thomas stood up from his chair, shading his eyes as he scanned the tree line beyond the riverbank. What he saw next would change everything he thought he knew about the intelligence and compassion of animals. Emerging from the thick brush along the river's edge came an enormous black bull, moving with careful, deliberate steps. But this wasn't an aggressive charge or a mindless rampage. The massive animal was carrying something precious in his mouth, a small, injured calf whose golden coat was stained with blood. Thomas felt his heart skip a beat as he realized what he was witnessing. The bull, who would later be identified as John from a nearby ranch, had somehow managed to transport his wounded offspring through nearly 2 miles of rough terrain to reach this remote section of the river. But why here? Why this particular spot? As John approached the water's edge, Thomas could see the extent of the calf's injuries. Deep gashes covered the small animal's body, and one of his legs hung at an unnatural angle. The calf's breathing was labored, his small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that spoke of shock and severe trauma. John gently lowered his head and placed the injured calf on the soft grass near the riverbank. Then something extraordinary happened. The massive bull turned his attention directly to Thomas, their eyes meeting across the 20 feet that separated them. In John's dark, intelligent eyes, Thomas saw something that took his breath away, a desperate plea for help from a father who had exhausted all his options. Thomas had spent his entire life working with his hands, solving problems, and helping others. But he had never been asked for help by an animal, especially not in such a clear and direct way. The bull's message was unmistakable. "Please save my child." For a moment, neither man nor beast moved. Thomas's fishing rod slipped from his trembling hands as he tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just an animal seeking water for an injured offspring. This was a calculated decision by a desperate father who somehow understood that humans had the power to heal. John took a few steps back from his calf but remained close enough to protect him, if necessary. His massive head swayed slightly as he kept his eyes fixed on Thomas, waiting for a response to his silent request. The morning mist continued to rise from the river, creating an almost ethereal backdrop to this unprecedented encounter between species. Thomas realized that this moment would define not just the rest of his day, but possibly the rest of his life. In his pocket, his cell phone waited to connect him to help. But first, he needed to gain the trust of this magnificent, desperate father who had chosen him as the last hope for his child's survival. Thomas slowly reached into his pocket, his eyes never leaving John's massive form. The bull watched every movement with intense focus, ready to protect his calf at the first sign of threat. Thomas pulled out his cell phone, grateful that he still had signal despite being in this remote area along the Sacramento River. "Easy, big guy," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible over the gentle sound of flowing water. "I'm going to help your little one." As Thomas dialed 911, John seemed to sense that help was coming. The enormous bull moved closer to his injured calf, lowering his massive head to gently nuzzle the small animal. The calf's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, and a weak sound escaped his throat, a soft call that seemed to say he recognized his father's presence. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. This is going to sound crazy, Thomas began, but I'm at the Sacramento River bend near Highway 101, and there's a bull here with a severely injured calf. The bull? He brought the calf to me. I think he's asking for help. There was a pause on the line. Sir, did you say a bull brought you an injured calf? I know how it sounds, but that's exactly what happened. The calf is in critical condition, and we need a veterinarian out here immediately. Within minutes, Thomas had been connected to Dr. Sarah Chen, an emergency veterinarian who specialized in large animal rescue. As he described the situation, he could hear the urgency building in her voice. I'm 20 minutes away, Dr. Chen said. Keep the animals calm and don't approach the calf directly. If the bull brought his offspring to you, he's showing incredible trust, but he's still a wild animal protecting his young. While they waited, Thomas did something he had never done before in his 3 years of fishing at this spot. He opened his tackle box and pulled out his emergency first aid kit, something his wife had insisted he carry after a previous fishing accident. The kit wasn't designed for animals, but it contained clean bandages and antiseptic that might help. John watched as Thomas slowly approached, the first aid kit visible in his hands. The bull's nostrils flared as he tested the air, trying to determine if this human posed a threat. Thomas stopped about 10 feet away and knelt down, opening the kit where John could see its contents. I want to help, Thomas said softly. Will you let me try to stop some of this bleeding? Hey everyone, if this incredible story is touching your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share amazing true stories of animal intelligence and compassion that will restore your faith in the natural world. Now back to John and his remarkable journey. What happened next defied everything Thomas thought he knew about animal behavior. John looked at the first aid supplies, then at his injured calf, and then back at Thomas. After what felt like an eternity, the massive bull took 3 deliberate steps backward, giving Thomas permission to approach his most precious possession. Thomas's hands shook as he carefully moved toward the injured calf. The little animal's breathing was growing weaker, and Thomas could see that time was running out. Gently, he began cleaning the worst of the wounds with antiseptic wipes, speaking in soothing tones as he worked. It's okay, little guy. Your dad brought you to the right place. Help is coming. John remained motionless during the entire process, his dark eyes tracking every movement Thomas made. The trust being displayed was extraordinary, a wild bull allowing a complete stranger to touch his injured offspring. But there was something else in John's behavior that amazed Thomas even more. Every few minutes, John would move closer to the calf's head and make a low, rumbling sound deep in his throat. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was comfort. The massive bull was actually talking to his child, reassuring him that everything would be okay. As Thomas wrapped a clean bandage around the calf's worst wound, he heard the sound of vehicles approaching in the distance. Dr. Chen had arrived with her mobile veterinary unit, along with animal control officers and a team of paramedics trained in large animal rescue. But as the convoy of vehicles came into view, John's demeanor changed dramatically. The protective father stepped forward, positioning himself between his calf and the approaching strangers. His massive head lowered, and for the first time since arriving at the river, he showed signs of aggression. Thomas realized that John trusted him, but these new arrivals were unknown threats. The careful bond that had been built over the past hour was now being tested. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Dr. Chen stepped out of her vehicle slowly, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. She had handled many large animal emergencies, but she had never seen a scenario quite like this one. Dr. Sarah Chen had seen many emergency cases during her 15 years as a large animal veterinarian, but nothing had prepared her for the scene at the Sacramento River. As she stepped out of her mobile unit, she could immediately sense the extraordinary bond that had formed between Thomas and the massive bull named John. Thomas, I need you to stay exactly where you are, Dr. Chen called out softly. You've gained his trust, and that's incredibly rare. I'm going to approach very slowly. John's massive frame tensed as Dr. Chen began walking toward them, her veterinary bag in hand. His protective instincts flared, and he positioned himself directly over his injured calf, ready to defend his child against these new strangers. The bull's eyes darted between Dr. Chen, the animal control officers, and the paramedics, trying to assess the level of threat. Thomas understood the delicate situation. "John," he said gently, using the bull's name for the first time. "These people are here to help, just like I helped." Dr. Chen stopped about 15 feet away and knelt down, opening her veterinary bag, where John could see the medical supplies inside. She had learned over the years that transparency often helped calm anxious animals, even wild ones. "I can see the calf is in shock," Dr. Chen said quietly to Thomas. "His breathing is too shallow and he's lost a significant amount of blood. I need to get fluids into him immediately or we're going to lose him." The urgency in her voice seemed to reach John on some primal level. The bull looked down at his weakening calf, then back at Dr. Chen. His massive head swayed slightly as he appeared to weigh his options. Trust these strangers or watch his child die. Dr. Chen made a decision that would later be called either brilliant or reckless. She removed a small IV bag and medical tubing from her kit and held them up where John could see them clearly. "This will help your baby," she said, speaking directly to the bull as if he could understand every word. "Thomas is going to help me, and you can watch everything we do." Remarkably, John seemed to process this information. After several tense moments, he took 2 steps backward, but remained close enough to intervene if necessary. Dr. Chen moved forward slowly, with Thomas staying between her and John to maintain the trust that had been established. As Dr. Chen began examining the injured calf, she discovered the extent of the damage was even worse than she had initially thought. The calf had multiple deep puncture wounds, likely from a dog attack, and his left rear leg was fractured in 2 places. But most critically, he was going into hypovolemic shock from blood loss. "Thomas, I need you to hold this IV bag while I insert the catheter," Dr. Chen instructed. "Keep talking to John. Let him know what we're doing." Thomas found himself in the surreal position of narrating a veterinary procedure to a bull. "John, Dr. Chen is putting a small tube into your calf's leg. It's going to give him medicine to make him stronger." What happened next would be talked about for years in veterinary circles throughout California. As Dr. Chen worked to stabilize the calf, John moved closer and began making low, rhythmic sounds, almost like humming. The injured calf's eyes opened slightly, and his breathing seemed to stabilize in response to his father's voice. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Chen whispered to Thomas. "It's like he's singing to his baby." The IV fluids began to take effect, and the calf's color improved slightly. But Dr. Chen knew they weren't out of danger yet. The fractured leg needed immediate surgery, and there were still concerns about internal injuries. "We need to transport him to my clinic," Dr. Chen announced, "but I don't know how John is going to react when we try to take his calf." As if understanding the conversation, John moved protectively over his offspring again. The massive bull had brought his child this far, and he wasn't about to let strangers take him away. Thomas had an idea. "What if John comes with us?" Dr. Chen looked at him as if he had suggested flying to the moon. "Thomas, we can't transport a 2,000-pound bull in a veterinary ambulance." "Then we need another plan," Thomas replied, "because I don't think John is going to let us take his calf anywhere without him." The standoff continued for several minutes. The calf needed immediate surgery, but John refused to allow his offspring to be separated from him. Dr. Chen was running out of options when one of the animal control officers approached with an unexpected suggestion. "There's a livestock trailer in the parking area," Officer Martinez said. "If we can get both animals loaded, we can transport them together to the clinic." It was an unconventional solution, but it might be their only chance to save the calf's life. The question was whether John would trust them enough to walk into a trailer, or whether this remarkable rescue would end in tragedy. Dr. Chen looked at the weakening calf, then at John's determined eyes and made a decision that would test the limits of the extraordinary bond that had formed between the species on this misty morning by the Sacramento River. The livestock trailer sat at the edge of the riverbank like a metal bridge between hope and heartbreak. Dr. Chen knew they had perhaps 30 minutes before the calf's condition became irreversible, but convincing John to enter an enclosed space would require a level of trust that seemed almost impossible to achieve. Thomas looked at the massive bull, then at the trailer, and made a decision that surprised everyone present. "I'm going in first," he announced, walking toward the open trailer door. "Thomas, that's not safe," Dr. Chen protested. "If John decides he doesn't like this plan, you'll be trapped in there with him." "He trusts me," Thomas replied simply. "And right now, I'm the only chance this calf has." Thomas climbed into the trailer and sat down in the far corner, making himself as non-threatening as possible. Then he called out to John, "Come on, big guy, bring your baby. We're going to save him." For a long moment, nothing happened. John stood protectively over his calf, weighing this new challenge. The trailer represented the unknown, a confined space where escape would be impossible. But his calf's breathing was growing more labored with each passing minute. Dr. Chen carefully lifted the injured calf, IV bag still attached, and began walking slowly toward the trailer. John immediately moved to follow, his massive hooves creating small clouds of dust with each step. The bull's eyes never left his offspring as Dr. Chen placed the calf on the soft bedding that had been spread in the trailer. The critical moment had arrived. Would John enter the trailer? Thomas continued talking softly from his corner. "Your baby needs help, John. The doctor has medicine that will make him better, but we have to go to her hospital." John approached the trailer entrance, his massive head lowering to sniff the metal ramp. Every instinct told him this was dangerous, but the sight of his weakening calf lying just inside the trailer drew him forward. Step by careful step, the enormous bull walked up the ramp and into the confined space. Dr. Chen quickly but quietly raised the ramp and secured the trailer door. They were now committed to this unprecedented journey, a fisherman, a veterinarian, and a desperate father traveling together to save a life. The 20-minute drive to Dr. Chen's clinic was the longest of Thomas's life. He sat in the corner of the trailer, watching John hover protectively over his calf. The bull's massive presence filled the space, but he remained remarkably calm, as if he understood that they were all working toward the same goal. When they arrived at the clinic, a team of veterinary technicians was waiting with a gurney designed for large animals. But the next challenge proved even more difficult than loading the trailer. John refused to let anyone take his calf into the building without him. "We can't bring a bull into a sterile surgical suite," Dr. Chen explained to Thomas. "But I don't think he's going to give us a choice." Thomas had spent the entire journey thinking about this problem. "What if we set up the surgery in the large animal treatment area? The one with the garage doors that opens to the outside?" It was another unconventional solution, but Dr. Chen realized it might work. Within minutes, her staff had transformed the large animal bay into a makeshift operating room. John was allowed to stand just outside the surgical area, where he could see his calf throughout the entire procedure. The surgery took 3 hours. Dr. Chen worked methodically to repair the fractured leg, clean and suture the puncture wounds, and address internal bleeding that had been discovered during the operation. Throughout the entire procedure, John remained motionless at his post, occasionally making low, comforting sounds that seemed to strengthen his calf's vital signs. Thomas stayed with John during the surgery, providing a familiar presence for the anxious father. As the hours passed, he found himself amazed by the bull's intelligence and emotional depth. This wasn't just an animal protecting his offspring. This was a father experiencing every emotion that human parents feel when their child's life hangs in the balance. When Dr. Chen finally emerged from the surgical area, she was exhausted but smiling. "The surgery went perfectly," she announced. "No internal damage. The leg will heal completely, and all the wounds have been properly cleaned and closed." John seemed to understand the good news. His massive head lowered toward his calf, who was now breathing steadily and showing signs of returning consciousness. For the first time since arriving at the river that morning, the bull's posture relaxed slightly. But the most remarkable moment was yet to come. As the calf's eyes opened and he tried to stand on his newly repaired leg, John gently nudged him back down with his massive head. It was a gesture of tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. 3 weeks later, Thomas returned to his favorite fishing spot by the Sacramento River. As he set up his chair and prepared his tackle, he heard a familiar sound in the distance, the contented lowing of cattle. Through the morning mist, he saw them, John and his calf, now fully healed and strong, grazing peacefully in the pasture beyond the tree line. The calf looked up from the grass and seemed to recognize Thomas. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the water, and Thomas felt a connection that transcended species. John raised his massive head as well, and in that moment of recognition, Thomas understood that he had been forever changed by this encounter. Some bonds are forged in crisis and strengthened by trust. What began as a desperate plea for help by the Sacramento River had become something much deeper, a reminder that compassion, intelligence, and love exist in forms we rarely take time to recognize. As Thomas cast his line into the calm water, he smiled at the knowledge that somewhere nearby, a father and his son were living proof that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simple willingness to help when help is needed most. The morning mist rose from the river, carrying with it the memory of a day when a bull named John taught a fisherman named Thomas that heroism comes in all sizes, and that the greatest rescues are often the ones we never see coming. A bull brought his injured calf to this man, then the unexpected happened.